Good Wednesday morning. I go for the fifth week. I love these texts. I have to say, I like them. They strike me as personal. Okay, but I'll read you this one. I'll read it to you. I'm going to be critical, not of the gospel, but whatever. You'll see. Jesus summoned the crowd again. He said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that enters one from the outside can defile that person, but the things that come out from him, from within him, are what defile." When he got home, away from the crowd, his disciples questioned about the parable. And he said, "Are even you likewise without understanding? Do you not realize that everything that goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and passes out into the latrine? Thus, he declared all foods clean, kosher. He rejects kosher food." Think about that. Imagine he's saying that to Jews. No wonder they were so threatened by him. He's thrown out the Mosaic law. Watch what he says here now. "But what comes out of the man, that is what defiles him. From within the man," watch what a transformation this is, "come from his heart. What comes, evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, and folly." See, that's what's evil that comes out of us. The sentiments of the heart, you see, the sentiments of the heart. All these evils come from within, and they defile. See, what he's done is he's taken away the externalities, and he's saying what is important is the intention of the heart. See? And I think back, though, can I share this with you? You guys that are older are listening to this thing, you got to be roughly my age. I think if you're younger than 70, this thing will be irrelevant to you. But those of us who grew up into our adult life in the 50s and the very, very early 60s, not later than 63 or 64, the council breaks this. But we were certainly, I can only speak from my own upbringing on the East Coast, but it's honest to God, we were absolutely bound by, it seems to me, all these externalities. Lord. Even the obsession with not eating meat on Friday. And let me show you, that was meant to be a penance, rightfully so, but we made it an obsession. And the canon lawyers took it over, and they said, because people had to cook, and they needed meat in their soup. Well, you could use a little bit of meat in the soup, but not more than 2 ounces. I think that's how I remember it. Now think about that. We reduced, honest to God, the practices of the 50s were down to that level. Not eating meat on Friday, not being late for Mass. If you're late was if you got in after the offertory or at the offertory, then you had to do it over again or you got a mortal sin. If you're late, you get a venial, but if you're later than that, you get a mortal. Think about that. Think of the legalistic mechanism. Probably well-intended in the beginning. We had chaos. You want to stop the chaos in the church, then you preach law-likeness, and I can understand that. But it became overwhelming, and what you never heard was the law of love. Obedience and fear, but not the law of love. That's a truth. I remember my father didn't have much use for any of that stuff. I think he saw the church as a racket. He came out of Italy where the priests had everything and the peasants had nothing, and he was one of the peasants. Yeah, that's a true story. There was a deep anti-clericalism in Tuscany and in my father's village. That's the truth. He said the priests never had a want for anything, but we had to give, whether we had it or not. We still had to give it to them. You can see it in his. He saw it, and he saw it in the restaurant. Okay, for whatever it's worth. It was a long time ago. I'm talking 60 years ago. But the priest, my father's restaurant, where he was a waiter, was the swankiest restaurant in New England, by far. It was rated that way by AAA. I told you that already. They averaged 100 priests a week for dinner. Not one of them ever picked up the tab. Somebody always bought them dinner. What a freaking privileged way of life. You see? So somebody like my father looks at that. He's got to be repulsed by it. Privileged class. It was a privileged class, and at the same time was a highly legalistic gospel. In many, many ways, we placed the burden on people's shoulders, but we didn't lift a finger to help them. I mean it. I'm not, how anybody, these young clergy today want to go back to the 50s, you can have it. You went back to slavery. That wasn't the gospel. That was canon law and custom with a vengeance. But what it wasn't was the gentle and self-sacrificial love of Christ. Thank God, I'm going to thank God all the time that I'm a Passionist. And my confessors had to break me of that kind of scrupulosity. And I told you, I thought this guy was going to get struck dead because he was horsing around. And the guy, reading, chanting the divine office. Jesus, Murphy. Okay? Not a chance. I'm grateful. And I know when I go to the confessional, I know the thing I always in my mind, you lift men's burdens. You lift their burdens. Don't place it on. But you don't make something good that's evil, but you don't condemn, you redeem. You redeem. You lift the burdens and guide to a greater freedom of heart and soul. But you're not there to punish. That's not. And I think of that all the time. I know as a Passionist, I have to say, when I was stationed in Louisville, 13 years, God, I couldn't tell you how many confessions we would hear there, because people would come from all over. Some would come 80, 90 miles. Priest confessions, nuns, lay people. They'd ring the doorbell. A certain doorbell was one bell, okay? And you were assigned for the day to hear confessions, which means anytime that door, you went there. I can remember being out with my dog and hearing the bell ring. Oh, you got to go and hear a confession. We used to hear a lot. And why? For anonymity, for one thing. You never saw them. You just heard a voice in the dark. But also, I think the compassion. Passionists are good confessors, because we contemplate the suffering of Christ, who loved us and suffered and died for us. That's the truth. I think from the time you enter the order and the time you become a Passionist student on, you're very, very aware of the compassion of Christ in the sacraments, in the preaching of the gospel, but also in the confessional, and especially in the confessional. I think that's why our missionaries, home missions, why we pack the house, why we do so well, is I think not only are we great preachers, but because we're great confessors. People find solace in us because we don't bring the condemnation, but the love of Christ to their hearts. We seek to free them from their burdens, not add to their burdens, let alone to punish them. That's the truth. I'm grateful I'm a Passionist. It's the most liberating vocation I could have ever been called to. I mean it. I went in a scrupulous 18-year-old. I ain't scrupulous no more, and I refuse to dump on anybody scrupulosity or burdens. Not here to do that. I'm here to lift your burdens by preaching the wisdom of the church, her guidance. I'm not creating anything. I hope I'm an instrument of the mercy of Christ through the church. Through the church, not in opposition, but through the church. The church is the body of Christ in the world. I hope always the church and my ministry within the church is a compassionate ministry, not a judgment, but a compassionate wisdom by hearing and listening to the cries of the poor who's sitting in front of me, in the church or in the confessional, and that I can extend to them what I have received, which is the compassionate love of Christ for me and his forgiveness. We go this way together. We walk the path together, the redeemed and the redeeming together.